If you grew up watching Beverly Hills 90210, you probably wonder the same thing millions of other fans, including myself, have been asking for over 30 years. How the hell was Dylan McKay so rich? I mean, here's a teenager living alone in a hotel suite, driving Porsches and throwing money around like he owned a small country. Meanwhile, his friends are worried about part-time jobs and college tuition. So what was Dylan's deal? Was he actually Bruce Wayne in disguise? Well, I've done the deep dive through every season, every episode, and every confusing plot twist the writers threw at us. And let me tell you, the story is way more complicated and honestly way more messed up than you probably remember. So buckle up, because we're about to solve one of the biggest mysteries in 90s television. Let's start with the basics. Dylan McKay wasn't just rich, he was stupid rich. We're talking about a high school student who could drop tens of thousands of dollars without blinking. But where did all this money come from? The answer is pretty dark when you think about it. Dylan's father, Jack McKay, was what the show politely called a businessman with ties to organized crime. In reality, Jack was a white-collar criminal who made his fortune through illegal activities. We're never told exactly what kind of crimes, but given his connections to the mob and his later cooperation with the FBI, we're probably talking about money laundering, fraud, maybe some light racketeering on the weekends. So, yeah, Dylan's trust fund was essentially blood money, not exactly the heartwarming origin story you'd expect from teen television. Now, about his parents, and this is where things get complicated. Both of Dylan's parents were alive when the series started, but they were divorced and basically terrible at parenting. His mother Iris was a free-spirited hippie type who had essentially abandoned Dylan to pursue her own spiritual journey. Classic mom move, right? At least in California. His father, Jack, was in and out of prison for his criminal activities, leaving Dylan to raise himself. So you have this incredibly wealthy teenager who's basically an orphan with a trust fund. It's like Home Alone, but with the psychological trauma and a Porsche 356 Spider. The trust fund itself was set up by his parents, primarily Jack, to provide for Dylan's future. Initially, Jim Walsh, Brandon and Brenda's father, served as Dylan's trustee. Jim was trying to look out for Dylan's best interests, which often meant slowing down Dylan's access to the money. But Dylan, being a rebellious teenager with daddy issues, eventually convinced Jim to let his father take over as trustee. The decision would come back to haunt him in ways he'd never imagined. Now, here's where the show's writers completely lost the plot, and I mean that literally. The amount of money in Dylan's trust fund changed depending on which episode you were watching. In Season 3, Episode 21, titled Dead End, it's clearly established that Dylan's trust fund is worth $10 million. That's what Brenda mentions when she asks Brandon, "What would you do with $10 million? But here's the thing, this is where fans have been confused for decades. In an earlier episode called Wild Horses, Dylan mentions that when he turns 21, he'll inherit a trust fund worth hundreds of millions. So which is it, 10 million or hundreds of millions? The answer is nobody knows. The writers clearly didn't have a series Bible and they definitely weren't talking to each other. This is one of the biggest continuity errors in television history and it's been driving fans crazy for years. But regardless of whether Dylan was worth 10 million or hundreds of millions, he was about to lose almost all of it in the most psychologically devastating way possible. In Season 4, Dylan meets a woman named Suzanne Steele, who claims to be the mother of Jack McKay's illegitimate daughter, a little girl named Erica. Dylan, who's desperate for family connection, accepts on both his family without really verifying the story. Suzanne then introduces Dylan to her new husband, Kevin Weaver, an environmental chemist working on clean beach projects. Dylan, being passionate about environmental causes and hungry for family, agrees to fund Kevin's work. Here's the twist that the audience knew, but Dylan didn't. Suzanne and Kevin were running a long con. They weren't family, Erica wasn't a sister, and Kevin's environmental project was completely fake. They were using Dylan's desperate need for family to steal his entire fortune. Think about how psychologically cruel this is. Dylan's already been abandoned by both parents, and now these people are exploiting his deepest emotional wounds to rob him blind. It's like taking candy from a baby, except the baby is a traumatized teenager with abandonment issues, and candy is $10 million. The con is revealed in the Season 4 finale, but by then, Suzanne and Kevin have disappeared with all of Dylan's money. Dylan tracks them down to Mexico in Season 5, where he has to team up with an ex-FBI agent named Jonesy to get his money back. They managed to recover about $8 million. Some of the money has been spent on living expenses and buying property, but here's the kicker. Dylan has to split the recovered money 50-50 with Jonesy as payment for his help. So Dylan gets back about $4 million out of his original $10 million trust fund. He went from being worth at least $10 million to having $4 million, and that's if we're using the conservative estimate. By Season 5, Dylan is nearly bankrupt and spiraling. He spent the summer in Mexico dealing with addiction issues and the psychological trauma of being betrayed by people he thought were family. The show makes it clear that Dylan is keeping his financial problems secret from his friends because he's ashamed. This is where the character really hits rock bottom. He's lost his money, his sense of family, and his trust in other people. Luke Perry's performance during this period is actually incredible. You can see the weight of everything Dylan's been through. But wait, there's more. Remember how Dylan's father, Jack, supposedly died in a car bomb explosion in season 3? Well, plot twist, he wasn't actually dead. In season 10, it's revealed that Jack's death was faked by the FBI. He'd been cooperating with the federal agents and they'd staged his death to put him in witness protection. Jack had been living under a new identity, had remarried, and even had another son. So not only did Dylan lose his money and surrogate family, but his real father had been alive the whole time and never told him. The psychological damage just keeps piling up for this poor guy. So what happened to Dylan's money in the end? Well, that's where things get murky again. Luke Perry left the show after season 6 and didn't return until season 9. When Dylan comes back, the show never clearly establishes his financial situation. He's not portrayed as destitute, but he's also not living the lavish lifestyle he had in earlier seasons. The writers basically ignored the whole money storyline and focused on his romantic relationships with Kelly and Gina. Based on what we can piece together, Dylan probably ended the series with a few $1 million. Enough to live comfortably, but not enough to be the ridiculously wealthy teenager he once was. So there you have it, the complete, confusing, and often contradictory story of Dylan McKay's money. The real tragedy isn't that Dylan lost his money, it's that his wealth came from his father's crimes, and his poverty came from his desperate need for family. In a way, money was both the source of his problems and the symbol of everything wrong with his family relationships. I wonder if you'd ask Dylan now, would he rather have given up the money and just had a good relationship with his father? And honestly, the writer's complete inability to keep track of how much money Dylan actually had is kind of perfect for a show about Beverly Hills. In a world where everyone's obsessed with wealth and status, nobody could even agree on how wealthy the wealthy kid actually was. Now, it's been over 30 years since Beverly Hills 90210 premiered, and fans are still trying to make sense of Dylan's financial situation. The truth is, the show writers probably didn't know either. They were making it up as they went along, and it shows. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the real Dylan McKay fortune was the friends he made along the way. I'm just kidding. The real Dylan McKay fortune was tens of millions of dollars that got stolen by fake family members. That's a lot of money. I'll see you later.